Chelsea have officially kicked off their pre-season tour in the US with a 2-2 draw against League One side Wrexham. We're going to be breaking it down, as we will be across the summer, looking at Chelsea's pre-season games, getting all the way up to that first game against Man City. And it was a bit of a mixed bag. I really do think this was in some ways very reminiscent of other pre-season games I've seen before, especially early ones when you are changing a lot of players. You have players there that maybe won't be in the first team squad for the majority of the season. You're waiting for some key players to return, which in this case, Chelsea and Enzo Maresca are. And of course, in the case of Enzo Maresca, it's not only a new coach, but he is trying to instill maybe quite a different style of play than his predecessor Mauricio Pochettino was. So all of that being said, you have to give some grace. You can't go overboard about it. You can't make really firm conclusions. As I've said in recent shows, that I really do think once we get to the Inter Milan game, we'll have a much clearer idea of the personnel, but also I think maybe some problems, some solutions. But there were some things to pick out as we'll get through here. Let's start off with the lineup that Enzo Maresca started with, and that was effectively written down a 3-4-3 where you had Reece James, unsurprisingly, moving into central midfield from a right-back position. So we had Robert Sanchez in goal, Tosin Adarabioyo, Benoit Badiashile and Levi Colwill pretty much making a back three. We know Levi for last season did move to a left-back position, so there is some kind of similarity or succession there because he can play on the left side. Carney Chukwuemeka, Reece James, Romeo Lavia, who obviously played barely any football last season, Tyreek George, a player we're going to talk about, and then up front we had Noni Madueke off the right, Mark Gui as the new signing from Barcelona making his first start, and Christopher Nkunku. So let's break this down in kind of two halves, because I actually think obviously there's more positives in the first half than there was in the second. I think the first thing to speak about, and it's been one of the key topics, discussion points that many Chelsea fans have been having pretty much since the appointment of Enzo Maresca, is this inverted fullback idea and who's going to fit it, who's going to not, what's going to be kind of the prioritization of that side. And in the first half, we didn't really have a natural left back playing. Ben Chilwell, neither. Renato Vega didn't even get any minutes in the game. So really, I think the key battle for this game was 245 minutes where you had Reece James in the first and Malo Gusto in the second. Reece James, unsurprisingly, I think acquitted himself a lot better. This is a guy who's played in central midfield before, obviously for Wigan most notably, but is someone we have seen it done in certain game states for Chelsea. So Reece is obviously very comfortable in possession. I think he is very comfortable to kind of take responsibility and move himself into more central areas, really become a beacon of kind of creativity for the side. I think the big question in that role for me is what you're potentially losing further up the pitch of Reece James if he now is in a position for Maresca where he isn't bombing down the flank, he isn't getting up there, he isn't being able to put in the sort of crosses in the sort of positions where he can be most devastating and also contributing goals. I think that's something we're going to have to see as the game as the season goes on, really, is that I think that there needs to be kind of a discussion over, well, yeah, Reece maybe, even from a fitness point of view, is maybe being aided by playing a more reserved role where he is more someone distributing the ball. But then again, from a creative point of view, you really don't want to be losing what you can gain from him further up the pitch. But clearly this was something that he was going to fulfill in the first game. And I think for that, he did a decent role. And I think the key thing for Reece James, as for, say, Romeo Lavia, Christopher Nkunku, other players who were injured for the majority of last season, just getting them out and playing minutes is key. Malo Gusto, I think, massively struggled with that. We'll get to that kind of bigger point. I think other players that really impressed for me, Mark Gui, obviously the new signing from Barcelona. One of the things that surprised me watching the game was he's a lot taller than I expected. And I think from kind of a pressing point of view, from someone who, you know, really from the off is going to make an impression, I think it was a good outing for him personally. I think he was someone who led the line, who added a bit of a presence, who was putting himself about, and someone that clearly backs himself that he's going to remain part of the first team. And the fact that David Datro Fofana hasn't been taken to this tour, I think it's likely actually that he's going to remain part of the team. I mean, even Armando Broja, a player who we kind of anticipated would be leaving and could still leave Chelsea this summer, was also part of this game. So one of those names who I think may surprise a few, may actually become a bigger figure than we expect. But for him, I thought as a first outing, as a number 9 for Chelsea, especially if Nicholas Jackson's still dealing with an injury of his own, obviously wasn't present for this game. So someone who will probably enjoy some more minutes and clearly played well in this first half and seemed pretty comfortable. Tyreek George is another one, was a name that we were all very excited to see, and playing off the left, very instrumental at times, was involved in the opening goal, but also someone who seemed very daring off the flank and someone who was trying to get balls into the box, trying to service the likes of Mark Gui, but also of course Noni Madueke on the other side and Christopher Nkunku. This is a big period, I think, for Tyreek George. I think in terms of his ability to kind of put himself out there and show that he can be at least a rotational option for Chelsea off the flank this season is obviously a big thing. So for me, I think this was a nice early showing. Not exactly outstanding, not something that you kind of raise your eyebrows and go, wow, that was absolutely incredible. But still, I think positive enough that hopefully he gains more minutes. And the fact that he was in a group of players that played well in the first half comparative to the second half will do him the world of good. And very much deja vu finally with Christopher Nkunku of scoring a lot of goals. He scored against Wrexham last year. He scored in nearly all the preseason friendlies other than the last one against Dortmund where he got injured. We really hope the trajectory or kind of the way it changes this year is he does really well in preseason, but then we don't have a Dortmund situation where on the eve of the season he gets injured. This is going to be a big player for Chelsea, and I think you saw again in that moment, again, you try and sort of don't want to make key conclusions of the game, positive or negative, and I think we have to keep on saying that, especially for a first preseason game. But again, you saw his instinct inside the 6-yard box. I think this is one of the things that elevates Nkunku as a signing for Chelsea, is he just seems to have a knack for being in the right place at the right time, but also being very ruthless in those positions, and clearly there didn't snap at the shot, took it, ruthless finishing, and hopefully we see more of that from Nkunku. And just kind of as a front three, is he going to play more off the left? Is he going to play more central, kind of behind maybe a front man or a front two? Again, these are things, unfortunately, that I don't think we're going to get a concrete answer to till Cole Palmer returns, because obviously he is such a big player for Chelsea, and I think how he is positioned for Maresca, I think is going to have a knock-on effect for other players. But yeah, I thought for a first half, it was kind of standard. The problem came obviously in the second half when Chelsea's balance seemed to go all over the place. We had a number of changes. Ben Chilwell came on, Josh Akpom, Malo Gusto, Wesley Fofana getting his first minutes in a year, Santos, Ugochukwu, Gabriel also came on, Armando Broja and Raheem Sterling. So a lot of names were brought on. Lucas Bergstrom also replaced Robert Sanchez. And Chelsea, I think the big problem in this half was just balance. Chelsea consistently getting hit on transition, and it's where, of course, both Wrexham goals came from. Especially the first one was pretty poor. It went straight through, literally across the box and for a tap. And in the second goal from Marriott, a really good finish, but especially down that right side, Malo Gusto, I think, really struggled comparative to Reece James, and it felt like there was a consistent theme of Wrexham getting in and probably should have scored more than 2, which again, against League 1 opposition, you kind of look at these problems and go, if they remain persistent, it's a massive step up in quality against Celtic. It'll be a massive step up in quality against the likes of Real Madrid, against Man City, who, as we get close to the season, are going to have a higher caliber of player to choose from rather than maybe in these earlier preseason games. But like Chelsea, you're having kind of a weird squad. It's going to look very different to that opening game at Stamford Bridge. But I have to say, I think one of the things that Simon Johnson put in his piece, I think, was very telling. He said, Chelsea had a lot of passes. They passed the ball a lot. They had a lot of possession, which was expected, but didn't create a lot of opportunities. And Maresca spoke about this where, maybe in some ways Wrexham was a good opening test because they sat deep. They asked Chelsea to break them down. And this is going to be a key problem, I think, for Maresca to solve. And, I think, as I've said last week, is going to be a defining, I think, issue for him as a Chelsea head coach with the way he wants to play football. And the way Leicester at times struggled last year, and we know how teams are going to set up. If you are going to play this very rigid possession style of football, to be able to break down opposition who sit deep, who ask you to break them down, who make it difficult, how you get around that is obviously going to be key and is going to be vital for Maresca, and is clearly someone who talks a lot about identity, talks a lot about dominating the ball, clearly believes that the team should be having a lot of the ball. how you deal with that is obviously going to be one of his biggest challenges. I actually always think with coaches like Maresca, and actually in recent history, the problems actually don't come against higher caliber opposition, because in a lot of those games, Chelsea don't have the ball and they have to deal with the quality of the opposition, but then also the benefit that you get from not having the ball at times and being able to hit on transition. A lot of Stamford Bridge games, I'm thinking this was kind of a atypical Stamford Bridge game where you're coming up against a team who are just going to sit deep, aren't budging, and it's on you to break them down, and then also have the balance to not be hit on transition, which obviously was a major problem for Chelsea in this game in the second half. So I want to hear your thoughts on it. You know, it's game one, and I remember this time last year, people making really firm conclusions about players like Raheem Sterling, per se, who then actually started the season relatively well. So what you don't want to do is kind of go, well, because this player didn't play well in this particular game, this like 45-minute period in an opening preseason game, he's done. You know, obviously that's farcical. And I think that as the opposition gets better, as we get players back, how that factors in. Are there going to be now a mix of players who played in the first half and the second half? Maresca maybe wants to see different combinations. But I think the biggest positive for me was Tyreek George, Christopher Nkunku, the return of Reece James, and in seeing how that inverted fullback system works. Because, you know, the ideas of Chelsea passing the ball around, having a lot of possession is something that even under Mauricio Pochettino we dealt with. You know, Chelsea are a superior team to a lot of teams in the Premier League and a lot of opposition they face. And this is kind of a standard thing. I think it's more in the way Maresca shapes the team, how certain players are used in different positions, how that striker role is going to be used, is all going to be, I think, contested and discussed over the course of pre-season. So for an opener, it wasn't great. I think one of the funniest things was the fight between Levi early in the game and a Wrexham player that just, you know, we don't need to see that intensity. Maybe it's a good or a bad thing, but, you know, it was quite funny to see intensity that early on in a preseason game, which is usually a little bit more laid back. But other than that, again, we're at the early stages of preseason. I think the positive is just to be sat here talking about football of some kind. And the good thing is we don't have long to wait until the second preseason game against Celtic. And, you know, it's going to keep rolling. So I think in that way, it's a good thing that we can move quickly from game to game and hopefully see a level of improvement in Maresca's team as we get closer to that opening game, which is massive. You know, to prepare the team for that game, it's going to be a high-level game. It's going to be an intense game. It's going to be one that has a lot of scrutiny and eyes on it. So I think for Maresca, you want these problems to be ironed out and you want them exposed right now rather than in the opening weeks of the season when stuff gets serious. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. Please do subscribe. Please do follow the show all across preseason, covering Chelsea news, but also, of course, the preseason games. And I will see you again very soon. All the best.